Welcome to the Empathy Avengers podcast, where we put empathy into action. In a world where understanding seems lost, where truth is questioned and compassion forgotten, we have united with a single mission to restore empathy to humanity. Meet Love, the bridge builder, who transforms pain into purpose.
Understanding begins when we truly listen to one another's journeys.
Meet Truth, the chronicle keeper, the voice for the voiceless.
Truth matters. Facts matter. People have a right to know what's actually going on.
And Inspiro, the tactical empath, turning opposition into opportunity.
Every conflict has a solution, and every mind can be reached.
And finally, meet Care, the heart translator, crafting connection through creativity.
Every heart has a story waiting to be shared.
Together, they are the Empathy Avengers.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Empathy Avengers podcast. We've got a really exciting lineup for you today. We've got the OG Empathy Avengers with us. The four folks you are looking at are the ones who've kind of been here every day and launched this initiative to bring back more empathy, which we all know how much we desperately need. So we're joined today by Fred Silverman, who is a veteran of PBS and CBS Media Company. And we're also joined by Spocko, who is a professional media trainer and communications trainer and longtime activist, especially against violent rhetoric in the media. So guys, thanks so much for joining us. We're thrilled that you're here.
Thanks for having us. And if you recognize my voice, that's me welcoming you to the Empathy Avengers.
Yes, Spocko does our stinger for the bookends. Yeah, thanks, guys. We are so excited to speak with you today. We speak with you almost every day, in full disclosure. But today we're going to do this podcast episode where we're going to really talk about the media and helping everybody understand what to look for. There's so much disinformation coming at us, but there's really important things coming at us too. How do we discern what's what? What are some trends and phenomenons that we all need to be aware of so that we can be smarter and have better media literacy in our daily lives? Not only social media, of course, but regular media. The mainstream media, I feel, is letting us down. I found this year that I've been really relying on independent media, Substacks, podcasts like ours and others, but it's really disheartening. So I just wanted to, because of course Fred and Spocko are our Empathy Avengers who have been involved more in PR and media. So we wanted to pick their brains and get their insight about what we're seeing right now.
I think what we're seeing is a real sea change, both in terms of ownership and approach. I started out with Walter Cronkite was the anchor of the CBS Evening News. And we all watched one of three or maybe four news shows, and that was basically it. So we had what was called the gatekeepers back then, in the sense that we decided what you would watch, frankly. But the thing is that we made them based on factual information, prioritizing those stories that were most important to people's lives. What we're seeing now is a total transformation of that. As you pointed out, Pamela, you've got Substack. People are coming to you on a number of different platforms. And to some degree, it's a democratization of media. But on another hand, it's just a breaking up into small pieces of what was once a tight mosaic. Now it's kind of frazzled all over the place, really. And I think what we're also seeing is there are a couple of changes, not just the democratization in the new distribution platforms, but you're also seeing a consolidation of ownership among certain political groups. People on the far right are buying up TV stations. Sinclair is one of the largest operators of local TV and radio stations, and they're owned by a very conservative group. Nexstar, they hired the former president of Fox News at one time to oversee their development of news operations. Though it seems like there's many stations, they have an ideology that's very narrow and very focused. And I think we're living in a really dark time right now.
We've seen the power of those two you mentioned, Sinclair and Nexstar, and what they just did with Jimmy Kimmel, silencing him based upon the president telling them to. And then when they decided to bring him back, Sinclair and Nexstar were saying, yeah, that's fine, but we're not going to air him. They finally caved, but that's some serious power for blocking free speech.
Caved when people complained. So we still have some power in that way. It's just that we don't have as much as we did, I think is the honest truth of it.
So we are recording this after the whole Disney Jimmy Kimmel debacle. Fortunately, Nexstar and Sinclair, who we're talking about, have recently caved and said they're going to put him back on the air. It did take the people to stand up and really be very loud and also vote with our wallets and unsubscribe. I'm sure that's what finally put Disney back over the hump. And I'm not sure how Disney finally convinced Nexstar and Sinclair to put Jimmy back on. I think this is only going to happen more and more and more, right? Like they're coming after all the media.
I think the reason Disney caved to us is that the creative community in Hollywood basically united and said, if you don't bring him back, there won't be any more production. When you have the actors, the directors, the writers, the producers, everybody lining up together, it's pretty tough to go against that. And they're saying, oh, but AI will replace everyone. And someday that might be true, but that's not today. I think it was a big deal. And ironically, it catapulted Disney into being the spokesperson for free speech. What I'm curious to see is when the Justice Department, which has been weaponized under the Trump administration, when they bring charges against innocent people, like the former director of the FBI, we don't see lawyers lining up and saying, you know what, we're standing together on this. We don't see that. So what we saw in Hollywood is not happening elsewhere at the moment.
I'm really interested in this, and I'm interested in Fred's take currently about what is happening. And the reason is because my longtime activism started with me taking some of the violent rhetoric that I was hearing on right-wing radio and sending it to the advertisers. I said to the advertisers, hey, do you want to associate your brand with these violent rhetoric? Because I don't think you do. And so the advertisers started pulling their ads. I did not use the FCC to try and get the license for the radio stations taken away. I knew that the FCC was a toothless tiger. I also knew that the radio station hosts were making money for the companies. They just were reaching the audience. If you don't like it, don't listen to it. Understanding the economic power and the leverage that I had was zero, but the leverage that the advertisers had was important. So what I did was I wrote those advertisers and I sent them audio clips, and then I put it up on my website so they could go and listen to it. Instead of the ABC Disney, the host saying, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have talked about blowing people's brains out and the violent things that they said, the host said to the ABC Disney parents, shut down this Spocko character because he is annoying. Disney, which owned ABC at the time, said, we're going to send them a cease and desist letter. We're going to sue the crap out of them because of their copyright violations. They had my website shut down. I then organized across the internet, across the country, said, ABC Disney, they shut down my free speech instead of making the hosts the victims of censorship. With the help of Electronic Frontier Foundation, I was able to prove that I didn't do any violations, and I became the hero, and they stopped. I beat Disney in a copyright case. And so what's interesting in this case was Disney was not the hero. Other people rallied around me, like they rallied around Jimmy Kimmel. The people who were using the leverage was the advertisers, the people who had the money. This is the thing that I wanted Fred to talk about a little bit, which was how the different levers that they use is about the money, and the people who represented the money in this case was the creative community. And the third area that I think is really interesting is about how when you have more money than God, like Elon Musk, you can ignore advertisers. I can say to hell with them, which he did, so I can keep going ahead. And the first time, Nexstar and Sinclair, they wanted their mergers to go ahead, which would represent more money for them than from any advertiser revenue. Yes, we can use creative communities, we can use these other ways, but we need to keep looking for other ways to block people who don't care about money the way that we think they do.
My understanding is that the reason Nexstar and Sinclair put Jimmy Kimmel back on the air within a few days is that grassroots activists in all of these local communities who was advertising on those stations called them up and said, stop.
Yeah.
And the pressure from that, it wasn't the pressure of the people, it was the pressure of that money.
Good.
Particularly Spocko's message.
My understanding is that's exactly what happened with those two station groups.
The two things I think is interesting about this is because we're talking about advertiser revenue, but also the organization of the people who to put the pressure on and who to alert. I never called what I did a boycott. It was always about alerting the advertisers about what was happening. The first group that I did this with, there's a small group of us contacted the KSFO advertisers. After that, another group was wanting to contact the advertisers for Michael Savage. You may or may not remember him. He was a right-wing, still is, I think. And one of the groups that did this, there was an ecumenical group that I helped that was religious groups, including CARE, Islamic groups, Jewish groups, etc. They contacted the advertisers and they got the same cease and desist notice from them, from their parent company saying, don't do it. However, since they followed my method exactly, and the EFF defended them in a court case and they won. So they dropped that case and that cost him $1 million. The next groups that we used it on was Glen Beck. And I worked with the current Media Matters head, Angelo Carasone. He was contacting the Glen Beck advertisers. Another group called Color of Change was also contacting the advertisers and contacting the corporate people, the PR people, the people who do diversity, and saying, hey, Glen Beck is race baiting. They contacted a bunch of them, 88 advertisers, and it stalled out. And I think that's the other thing is they keep adapting to our techniques. So they ignored them and they said, that's not big enough. Murdoch was so big and the corporation was so big, they could ignore money losing for months of a time. And the investors did not know that it was being subsidized. The next level, I organized and contacted the institutional investors for News Corp. And I said, what you think is this money-making program, it's not. You're losing money on it. And the institutional investors didn't know about it. 2011, I called in during a financial conference call and I asked Rupert Murdoch, how long are you going to keep subsidizing the Glenn Beck show? Because there's nothing on there but gold ads. And he was like, oh, it's a great lead in and it's, it's not, I don't think those many advertisers left. And that opened the door because News Corp was not reporting that there was no ads on it. And then Reuters picked up the story and you find out 300 advertisers would not advertise on the Glenn Beck show. And that's what got Glenn Beck fired. Not because of anything what he said. It was because the institutional investors said, we need our money this quarter. They keep adapting when you cost them money and you have to find new leverage points because they figure out a way to still make money even though you take away their ad revenue.
There used to be a time back in the 70s, which really was the way it always had been up to that point, where you couldn't have a radio station and a TV station in the same market, or a newspaper and a TV station in the same market. Why? Because the feeling was that you would be able to exert too much influence in that particular market. Now that's all gone. Literally, Sinclair owns, I think, 200 or 300 stations, as does Nexstar. And when Nexstar merges with Tegna, which is the old Tribune Broadcasting, they'll be the biggest operator in the country. Really what you're looking at now with the Ellison family buying up Paramount, they're making an offer to buy up Warner Brothers Discovery, which is CNN, and now they're also new owners of the TikTok, the deal that Trump is supposedly negotiating with the Chinese to take over TikTok. It's going to be the Ellison family. So the control of these people, and they're all Trump allies. Understand, when I worked at CBS, you couldn't even write a book. If you were doing a story, you did the story on air. You didn't do it and then keep half of it for a book project later. I think what we've seen really overall is not just a consolidation in the media, but a dropping of our morality, our ethics as a society. We used to have professional standards for both journalists, doctors, lawyers. Everyone followed certain standards in their profession. And I feel like much of that's eroded away now and it's all gone. And it's a shame because we've lost a lot.
Fred, when you talk about the reduction of professional standards in medias, and there were different rules that they had within the organization. So if you are writing about this, you can't do a book about it later. I was just listening to Cory Doctorow talking about his new book about Enshittification. He talked about how there were, in some cases, rules, there were regulations, there were also other companies that would come along that would stop people from breaking the rules. So if you did this, another company would come in and eat your lunch. Or if you did this, you would get fined. Or if you broke some kind of law, then there was the SEC. And with the constant mergers, and we saw this with Google, and full disclosure, I helped launch Google as a corporation, all right? I knew that as they grew, they kept buying small companies that they might have been potentially competitors, or, hey, we like this as a product. Instead of us developing it, we'll just buy this company. That's part of the thing about public companies buying everything, is they can not only stop competition, but there is nobody to stop them from doing terrible things. And they will continue to grow if the people who write the rules, who want to feel good about their company, that was a group that I appealed to. When I contacted them, I said, you don't want to advertise with this sexist person who talks about horrible things. And they said, yeah, that taints our brand. But one of the things that I found out with working with corporations was there's two people with it. There's the sales guys and the stock people who said, screw it, we got to make more money this quarter. And then there's the people said, our integrity as a corporation is important and it's valuable. And if we ignore it, it hurts our overall value. That convinced the salespeople, oh, that can affect our bottom line. That's the thing that I think is missing currently, even though I know there's a lot of people who still believe in those kind of values internally.
And their quest for more profitability have really tossed the people who care out the window, and they're just going on their merry way. And if you look at it back in the 70s or 80s, you had literally hundreds, if not thousands, of companies in every sector. Now we're down to 4 or 5 companies in every sector. That's it. So the consolidation has been occurring over the last 50 years, 40 years. It's at a point now where we have basically 3 or 4 companies in any given sector, and soon it'll be 2 companies in every sector, and then 1.
I would argue that part of the reason why we don't have as much of the people who are worried about the integrity of their company is because the whole mind war of it all has shifted the Overton window such that people just don't care about that anymore. And even the audience isn't being as loud and complaining about the loss of integrity. The Overton window has shifted. So now we've lost the critical mass that we need to have both the integrity at the people who work for the companies and also just the furor or frustration of the audience. Their Overton window has shifted too. So they're not even realizing that they should be more upset and call and make that phone call and actually complain. So I think we're in this position where we're just still trying to tread water and we're not making any progress and it's only getting worse.
Pamela, that makes a great point about the internal people. During the height of the pandemic, the way that disinformation about viruses and vaccines got spread, and I followed a group called the Center for Countering Digital Hate. And they talked about the financial incentives for people to spread disinformation and the penalties for people who revealed what was happening. So, for example, the whistleblower for Facebook, Frances Haugen, she came forth and said, Facebook is ignoring our own guidelines about violence, about disinformation, And why? Because they made more money with angry engagement. And then she got sued. They won't speak up, not only because it will destroy their careers, but because the financial incentives for everybody around them would be threatened. One of the areas that I think is how we can help the people, those internal people who do still believe in certain things, help them fight back, is to give them pathways to get financial revenue for themselves, but also to punish financially these corporations. Something that just happened the other day that I thought was really important was there was a lawsuit that was filed against ICE, a $50 million civil lawsuit out of LA, where an American car wash owner was slammed to the ground by ICE. And so there's now a $50 million lawsuit. A friend of mine developed the QTAM laws in California, where if a corporation is ripping off the government or there's an SEC violations, somebody can come forward and say, hey, this company is doing terrible things, and the government will sue them on their behalf and they'll make the money from it. So we need to look for those kinds of remedies to help the people internally to say, this is horrible things they're doing, and you might be making more money, but it's going to cost you. And this is the financial penalty that we can do right now to help.
I'm not sure that has the kind of cachet that it once did. Thinking back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I did a show with public television about what happened in the 2000 election in Florida. And at the end of it, I had a very good relationship through the 90s with public television where I'd give them a rough cut. They'd give me suggestions. I would incorporate them and send them to broadcast master. That ended with this election show. And this show was basically all we said really was that Al Gore would have won had the Supreme Court not intervened. So Karl Rove, who was the chief of staff in the White House at the time, got very upset. For some reason, he had found out about this show and he had found out about what we were saying and doing and the people we interviewed. And they went quite ballistic. And they said they've threatened lawsuits. They can never air. So what we wound up doing is a comedic documentary, and I luckily was able to work with the people from Saturday Night Live. But at the end of the day, I remembered speaking to someone who's a senior official of public television saying, you know, this is wrong. And he said, yes, I know this is wrong, but I have a mortgage and I have kids in school. What do you want me to do? Jeopardize all that? And therein lies the problem that we have in this society right now.
Yep.
And I don't know how you
And that's
resolve
what
that.
everybody in Congress is going to say.
Well, that's worse in Congress because I think the Republicans are actually being threatened, physically being threatened, or their wives, their children. There are numerous reports now that the Trump people and MAGA people, whatever, are going after these people and saying, you better do what the president says, or we know where you live. They've been doxing them, sending pizzas with the names of the federal judge in New Jersey whose son was murdered with his name written on the orders. I mean, they know what they're
Melissa
doing.
Hortman,
Yeah,
her
some crazy
husband, the
guy,
dog
exactly.
were
He had a
murdered.
list of all the Democrats in the state house. I mean, he was going to go after them one by one. A hit squad, basically. He was a single man hit squad. We really are living in real time. Spocko, you speak about, digital media and Facebook and Google. The problem is that in 2008, when we had the financial crisis, they all said, oh, the banks are too big to fail. Well, these tech companies are 100,000 times larger than anything close approaching what the size of those banks were. And the power that they yield it's unbelievable. It's simply unbelievable. And I don't know how we deal with that. And you're right, because it is not what it appears to be. It's a rigged system designed to suck you in and keep your attention span for longer and longer. And they find that conflict is really what is the most successful in terms of creating revenue for them, because when you're incited, you stay more, you watch more, you listen more.
My hopium outlook for this is that it's independent media and independent journalism, like this podcast.
What happens when they cut the internet? Look at what they've done in Russia. I'm not trying to give you a hard time, Pamela, but look at what they've done in Russia. They've done in Belarus. They've done this in Hungary. They limit access in certain ways. They have all the cards right now. And other than taking to the streets, I don't know what else we can do. And the problem is what I said a minute ago about the guy with his mortgage.
We definitely still need to take to the streets, but I guess my point is that I feel like the audience needs to empower the independent journalisms that are out there already to allow us to pay our mortgages and to keep doing what we're trying to do. And that's where I know it's a lot to ask the people who can afford it. Yes, please subscribe if you can and with a paid subscription, because the rest of us who are actually doing these podcasts and Substacks, mainly just trying to echo some of the other great work that's out there and amplify it. This is the machine I think that's going to save us, because that's how we're going to get our information without having the FCC clamp down on the mainstream media, because that's obviously going to be happening more and more.
And if we don't use our voices now, we may not have another chance.
What does that mean, Mindy? I mean, what does it mean to use your voice now? I think that people say, oh, there's a lot of these slogans out there: use your voice, stand up, be counted, whatever. But what does that mean realistically in today's environment?
So for me, I got super active on Twitter during the George Floyd protests. I had just had lung surgery prior to COVID, so I was stuck at home. I was locked down, but my outlet was social media. I started asking questions and interacting with people. So for me, writing on social media has been a form of activism, which has led into real life on the streets activism. My very first post in New York against Fox News with Truth Tuesdays. I feel like staying engaged, staying informed, and having those hard conversations with people in our real lives and online. That's what it means to me.
Yeah, I would say I would echo that. Actually wasn't on Twitter, and especially, of course, when Twitter became X, it became even worse, more of a cesspool, even though it was already pretty bad, which is why I wasn't there. That platform obviously changed hands and the vitriol increased.
Yes.
But I do think that it's still important for us to have our voices and put it out there. So I'm on Twitter, I'm on several others. And yeah, people pivoted to Blue Sky. Threads is a thing now. I think Threads actually has more active users monthly than Twitter now, which is interesting. I do think we're going to need to pivot, because I've been shadow banned when I'm trying to do pro democracy type stuff. We need to always be pivoting. And to your point, whether if Substack gets shut down, you need to be out on multiple platforms if you're trying to spread the truth. I try to amplify other people's messages by retweeting, quoting a post as you retweet is sort of better, because it goes to all of your followers, and the original person's followers can potentially see it because it's a retweet or a reshare. So that's kind of better than just replying and making a comment on somebody's post that you're wanting to engage on. But that's good too. And I'm not saying everybody needs to be on social media all the time. I'm just saying that I think for me, putting out good messages is kind of counteracting or counterbalancing the cesspool of it all and the horrible stuff that's out there.
Counteract the algorithm, because they're not objective algorithms. They're promoting certain values, certain beliefs,
Right.
certain ideas over others. And your ideas are probably not being promoted right now.
Yeah, I noticed, I think they call that shadow banning when I put something out and it doesn't get amplified as much as like a benign tweet.
Of something that attacks Democrats.
Something that attacks Democrats is probably amplified more. It's only going to
No,
get worse from here on out, as far as I can tell. But that's why I think multiple platforms, multiple methods. So words seem to do better on Threads and Blue Sky, maybe, at least in my experience, as opposed to videos, memes, and images do better on Instagram and TikTok for sure. Videos are best on there. We'll have to see how TikTok evolves.
I think that what Fred is talking about and asking about, there are multiple methods to deal with this that Pamela talked about, and they need to be targeted to the different platforms, like what works for them best. And the other part of it, which we've been talking about, financial incentives, revenue, etc. One of the ways that independent journalists can keep going is from their funding sources not tied to advertiser revenue. I think it's important for people to know that ProPublica has been doing amazing journalism work, but they're not based on advertiser revenue. And they work with other journalists or other people and say, here's this story. How do we emphasize this? How do we share this across all our platforms? Because Facebook was shut us down and this one shut us down. Okay, well, we can go through Mastodon, or we can go through email to people, or we can have independent in-person meetings and stuff like that. That's the other way to share. It is not just on social media, it is on other forms of communication, including voice and signal.
Yes, you mentioned signal security. We need to mention that as well, keeping our community safe. All of us, along with a bunch of other folks, we have a signal chat. We have some cybersecurity folks in there that are really focused on keeping us safe. Just recently, with Trump signing that executive order against Antifa, we had to pivot, like Pamela just said, and pivot to just our community chat where we're still keeping each other informed and connecting, which is really the best thing about social media, in my opinion, is these connections that I have made. For that, I'm really grateful. But I do see the negative side. I mean, I've had suicide trolls after me online for 4 or 5 years now. You know, there is the algorithm that pushes hate, and that's why we're here, is to counteract that hate with love and empathy and ethics.
Yeah,
Thank you for bringing us back to that. I have gotten a tremendous amount of support and just feeling better about talking to real people and seeing their face. It really helps because it reminds us why we want to have this kind of world, and feeling that I don't want to go on social media and feel afraid and scared all the time. So why is it that these angry right-wing radio people make money from their hate? One of the things that people don't necessarily tell people is that it was a rigged system. These people were making money from this because it was the default, that there was no alternative to that kind of hate radio.
So remember, it's pushed from the church pulpits too. Everybody I knew in Texas kept Christian radio playing, or talk radio, like you're talking about Glen Beck. They had that in their homes, in their car. You know, it's a constant. You're being bathed in brainwashing. So they're getting it from not just media, but churches directing them. They should be paying taxes because they're pushing people like Glen Beck. I mean, Spocko, we have this in common. He was speaking for at the church I attended many years ago, and I walked out on Glen Beck. It was so political coming from behind the church pulpit. It really made me mad.
Yeah, it's the churches, to your point, to paint a broad brush. It's the business owners who have maybe or tend to be more Republican, who will mandate that Fox News be channel that's playing in the waiting room of the medical facility. I used to work at a scientific research facility, and when I would go to the clinic in Kansas City suburb, they would have Fox News on in the clinic in the waiting for everybody to see, for all the workers and all the people who are coming in for as patients. And so I was like, wow, these people are all getting brainwashed. And I'm from California, go to Kansas City, and that's all I see. And so I realized I see the difference. And that was years ago, even before Trump 1.0. So it's been going on for a long time. Obviously, the Rush Limbaugh of it all back in the day, the Glenn Becks, the Fox News, of course, and now Newsmax and all the other crazy crapo stations that are out there. But we need to pivot. My point is, we blue people need to consolidate and pivot. I think the audience is responsible for seeking out the truth and recognizing when they're not getting the truth and pivoting themselves. I'm not going to say that 60 Minutes is going to start lying to me, but it's just not giving me the kind of cutting edge news that I used to count on it for. It's already pretty much sanitized.
Yeah, I think they all are right now, and it's a real problem.
Very sad to see.
You're right that it requires more of us as an audience, but the problem is that us as an audience are not rising to the occasion.
Right.
They're falling to the lowest common denominator. And their whole battle on free speech, it's an evolution. The fairness doctrine limited people like Rush Limbaugh from being on the air. It required us to present both sides of a controversial issue so that the viewer themselves could decide. That's a pretty heady concept. It speaks to what you're talking about, Pamela, where the audience decides these things. But the problem now is there is no more fairness doctrine. And so that led to the talk radios we talked about in Fox and the consolidation of right-wing media. But now the problem is that with their battle against free speech, it's really a battle to be able to lie to us. It's not really about free speech anymore. It's really about, I can tell you that the earth is flat and you have to listen to me. And that's crazy when
Or
you think.
Tylenol causes autism and stuff. I mean,
Exactly.
it's
Exactly.
Exactly.
They have hijacked the government, and so
And
therefore
but they've also hijacked the information systems that we
they have the
rely on.
FCC and the information systems. That's where I'm coming from because I have a Substack, I have a blog, I have a podcast, more than one podcast, and I don't ever have to tell the FCC what I'm doing. For now, I don't have to worry about the FCC weaponizing their regulations or regulatory ability, which is what these big corporations are worrying about right now. Right now is the moment for independent journalism. And again, like I'm not a journalist, but I just want them to succeed because I need the truth. As a consumer, I need to be able to trust the media sources that I'm reading.
The entire ecosystem has been rigged against us. If you look at big tech, their algorithms control what you're going to get in your feed. The problem is that the advertising as well. Digital advertising is a $300 billion industry in the United States alone right now. It's mind-boggling the size of it, but 82 maintained by three companies, Amazon, Meta, and Alphabet. They maintain 82% of all of that digital marketplace. And every time a state, as New York has tried to do now, to tax it, they come after us with a vengeance. The only state that's been able to get away with it so far is Maryland. And it's a relatively small tax, but that's the only one. Out of the 50 states, every state would love to generate additional revenue from these ads, from taxing it, but they strike everywhere they can. My point is simply to say that we're living in a very difficult time right now where all of our institutions have been turned against us. That's all.
That is fascinating. I listened to Matt Binder had on his podcast, Doomed, a woman who talked about the ad tech industry, which was basically the middleman between Alphabet and the advertisers.
Which is owned by Alphabet and Meta. But they own that middle market.
I was just listening to Cory Doctorow on his new book, talking about how Europe was actually fighting some of this consolidation and regulation.
They are the only ones. They're the only ones that are.
And it's also looking at ways that they will rip themselves off is their own internal revenue mechanisms. This again is back to funding for journalism. I worked originally when I worked with Elon Musk back in the early days, back before he was famous and rich. He had a company that was trying to do basically what Craigslist did, take those classified avenue revenue stream that was coming into the newspapers they could use to fund journalism. Now we have all these other places that used to get revenue from Google searches now and then going to their website. That's gone away. Again, looking at ways to say, all right, we need to have funding and other sources, otherwise we're all going to die. So that's one of the reasons why we have got to figure out how to fund these kinds of organizations. And you can't always rely on the advertising revenue.
Canada and Australia have both looked at having these use taxes. So that basically every time Facebook linked to a news article from the Canadian Press Association, for example, it had to pay the Canadian Press Association a certain amount of money. So Facebook's answer to that was, well, we're not going to link to them anymore. So they stopped running news in Canada, or Canadian news anyway. And that took a massive hit. It's just everything we try to do. And now we're trying to regulate by putting tax on digital ads. But the problem that we're facing now is, at least in the blue states, New York alone is going to have a $5 billion budget deficit this year just because of the federal tax cut in the big, beautiful bill. It's hard to take the money out for journalism when people are starving in the streets, but that is where we are right now. And they are starving in the streets, and it's only going to get worse. I happen to be living in a fairly affluent area outside New York City, but the fact is that our food banks are overwhelmed right now, everywhere across the country. And it seems like the Trump administration really doesn't care. They are fine to have people die of hunger in the streets. This is going to look like Gaza soon at the rate we're going. They seem to be hell-bent on destroying the country.
Yeah, because they're Putin's bitch.
In America, that's for sure. I know.
We're not autonomous at this point in our country.
We are doing something. Your governor in California has a CDC, and most of the northeastern states have joined that as well. So we're creating that. Soon we'll probably have to create a national weather service because that'll be gone, unless you want to listen to AccuWeather all the time. There's a lot of things that have to start happening here, but it's tremendous. It's a lot of work, and people are going to die and people are going to starve. I don't know if you saw just recently Trump showed up with an AI video about meta
Yeah,
beds or something. This
yeah.
futuristic. It looked like something out of Star Trek, Spocko.
The QAnon
Soon we will be rolling out these wonderful hospitals where you can go
Mhm.
and sit in a cocoon and be diagnosed and come out all well. It's just sheer lunacy as reality. And I'm sure that his media buddies are going to start promoting it as this is where we're going. This is great. It's just sheer madness.
Well, I mean, it's a cult. That med beds thing is, like Pamela said, it's a QAnon conspiracy that, again, the president of the United States, with the bully pulpit he has, when they asked him for the first time, I think it was 2021, but they asked him about QAnon, he said, "Oh, I don't know much about it, but I hear they really love me." And he and Mike Flynn and all the others that have pushed this fucking cult, they are controlling the information systems. And yeah, it is super frustrating to try to break through that.
For years, they've been saying the Democrats are pedophiles. Like the Jews are destroying Germany, the Democrats are destroying America now. It's a miracle that more people haven't been killed yet.
Well, that
Yeah.
is Darvo, classic Darvo, which we probably should do a whole episode on Darvo. So maybe let's think about that. But Darvo, for those, we'll give you a little introduction, is deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. And it's basically, I love how Jim said that it's basically me rubber, you glue from when we were kids.
Mhm.
Basically, it's projection. Everything that I'm guilty of, I'm going to say that you are doing. And there's so many. So yeah, we should definitely do a whole nother episode on that. Uh,
Got it.
yeah, I had an interesting experience. I'm not super knowledgeable about all this stuff, but last year I was looking into placing ads because I wanted to get in on the abortion election initiatives. So I was thinking about placing ads, and I looked into, obviously there's traditional advertising, but then I was going to go for digital advertising, and I got spooked because people were telling me that when they go, oh, you get so many views and so many click-throughs or whatever, that that's bullshit information. So like how are people being I know from the entertainment industry it's sort of unreliable, like the number of views that the television programs are getting because Netflix and those guys are not really sharing that information. They're just saying this is a number one program, this is our number two program, and they're not really being as transparent as we used to get with Nielsen ratings. Same with advertising. I feel like if somebody's going to spend money on advertising, how do they know that they're getting the right views and stuff with all this digital media? So, what do you guys think about that?
One of the people that I am a huge fan of is named Matt Binder, and he has a podcast. He has two podcasts. One's called Doomed, and the other one's called The Scam Economy, which I do the voiceover for. Welcome to the Scam Economy with your host Matt Binder. Matt has great guests on, and one of them he had on. This is in May 12th, 2022. Was Nandi Jamai. She's the co-founder of Check My Ads, which is a group that looked at the ad tech industry and looked at and found there's a tremendous amount of fraud. They're kind of like the middleman between the advertiser, like for say Uber or something like that, and the people who get the ads, who want to run it on their platforms, on their websites, etc. And she tracked down and found out that groups like Breitbart and Steve Bannon's website, all of these sites that the advertisers like Uber did not want to be on because of their horrible content, they were getting defrauded by the ad tech industry and the funneling this money to Breitbart and to Bannon's war room. And that's one of the ways they're getting money, even though they alerted and said, Uber, hey, you said you didn't want your money going to these websites. It still is. And she tells a great story on this podcast how ad tech companies you've never heard of are helping the internet's worst and selling your online data in a post-Roe America. And she explained how this fraud was happening, and the Uber people were really pissed. And we're talking millions of dollars going to place ads in places they did not want. It was pure fraud. And if we talk about ways that you can shut down the bad actors, is to go after the fraud, because at least if it's not getting to the journalists, at least it's not going to go to these horrible people. This, I think, is another part about constantly looking at ways that they're gaming the system, and ways that you can at least convince advertisers, say, hey, you do not want your brand tainted by going to these bad people, and to the organization saying, this is fraud, out and out fraud, and you can sue them in a civil lawsuit to reclaim your money. There are ways that the people can alert people, but it's also ways that internally people can say, hey, this is just bad. This is ripping us off, and we're not wanting to do this to our own brand. And that's their own self-interest. It is a way to keep people say, I think these are terrible people saying terrible things. It's lies, it's fraud, and they shouldn't be getting money from people, period. And if they do, then there are financial reasons that we can stop them. It is still something that is real, and we're letting people know, alerting them that this is something that's happened. We saw with the Disney shutting down Jimmy Kimmel and the people saying, hey, this is bad. Jimmy Kimmel's good. Keep him up. Those are the kinds of things that we can keep alerting people to in all of our different channels. It doesn't take as many people as you think, but it takes a lot of like local people just making a quick phone call or letting them know. An individual phone call can count to a lot more than just online clicking. Things that we can keep in mind to keep moving on the positive side, not just letting them win.
The thing about digital advertising is that so much of it's an automated system. It's the ad exchanges now. So you really don't know what's going on. But part of the issue really with digital advertising is that it's a bit of a scam, because basically I ran a digital media company for almost a decade. We were the main supplier of video news to the newspaper industry in North America, what's left of it. Sports Illustrated, for example, would come up with a big ad campaign. They say, oh, we got $20 million to run Nike ads, and they only had 10 million impressions. So they would go to a bot farm and buy the other 10 million. And that's what happens in digital all the time now. So whereas with Nielsen in television and radio, there was a metric that they utilized, an agreed upon industry standard, where they measured these homes and they knew what the actual number was, or pretty close to it. There's no such thing, there's no corollary in digital. It's all smoke and mirrors, basically.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you for this conversation. As always, I learn so much from all of you. I really appreciate it. You can follow Spocko on Mastodon, Blue Sky. I'm calling it Twitter. It's Twitter. It's not X. You can follow him there, and he's at Spocko's Brain. Fred is not on social media, but you can see his work, his documentary, Who Cares? Election Reform in America, and I highly recommend it. We've watched it on Movies with Meaning and had a conversation with Fred, and it's a really great reminder of what happened during that election and how far we got from having our votes count. It's been a pleasure. Thank you guys, everyone, for joining us for the Empathy Avengers podcast again, where kindness is your superpower and empathy saves the day.
The Empathy Avengers, where we put empathy into action.